A financial system can be seen at work wherever there are people. But in Britain, it's in a peculiarly concentrated form. All countries have their financial centres, but only Britain has the city. Banks and other financial institutions are comparative latecomers here. Materials were traded in long before the goldsmiths and merchants had begun to evolve a sophisticated method of paying for them. And the city still has its markets and trading areas, from fish and furs to wool and diamonds. Scattered throughout the district, but especially concentrated in a small inner ring, however, are the banks, insurance offices, and exchanges. The Bank of England in Threadneedle Street, and a few yards away, in Throgmorton Street, the Stock Exchange. Lloyd's, who likes to think of itself as the home of insurance, and whose underwriters and brokers would be appalled to think of it as an office. The marble-pillared headquarters of the great clearing banks that do most of the banking business in Britain. The merchant banks, smaller and more specialized. The foreign banks who find it profitable to come to the city. The gold merchants. The city fascinates observers because it distills so many essences. It can be used as evidence for the efficiency of free enterprise or the survival of privilege. The resilience of the British, or the ingenuity of greed. The mundane city crowds contain almost every financial figure of importance in the country. Most of them would know one another by sight. Many of them would be friends. Here are some city men. Lord Kindersley, the second Baron, part-time director of the Bank of England, merchant banker, insurance director, the chairman of Rolls-Royce, and on the boards of many other companies. This gentleman, whose name we cannot give, is the head of the largest stock jobbing firm in London and one of the most influential men on the stock exchange. Mr. John Cowan, senior general manager of Barclays Bank, whose published assets are more than £2,000 million. The government broker, Mr. Peter Daniel, who buys and sells in the stock exchange on behalf of the Bank of England. The secretary and chief investment manager of the Prudential Insurance Company, Mr. Leslie Brown, who, among other things, has to invest about £2 million every working week of the year. The Bank of England's power and influence is felt throughout the city. This program explores that power and influence. The most significant single figure in the city, in banking and in British finance generally, is the Earl of Cromer, Governor of the Bank of England.
Mr. Paris. Oh, Mr. Paris, nice to see you again. Could you grab us down, please?
I suppose television is a routine matter for you.
It's the first time I've done a television interview with Max Paris.
Really? The Governor of the Bank of England is traditionally the most exalted figure in the city. To what extent are the decisions of the bank his decisions? Is he in any sense a figurehead, or is he the man who is the true executive?
No, the number of decisions which come up to the Governor personally are really extraordinarily large. The degree of personal decision and exercise of judgment is exercised every day a number of times. And so that there is a large degree of personal running of the bank by the Governor, despite the fact that he's admirably supported by a very expert staff.
Can you give me an instance of, or some instances of the kind of decisions come to you?
On whether to intervene in any of the markets any day, be the exchange market or the gilt-edged market. These are daily decisions, practically. But there are other decisions of policy matters as to what recommendation we should make to the Treasury on various matters that we have under mutual discussion. So the line we should take, the bank should take, those are the personal decisions of the Governor.
Now, you're a Baring, member of the family of Barings, the merchant bankers. Does this make your work any easier? Does it make it easier to deal with people in the city?
Well, it makes it easier from the point of view that many of these foreign visitors, foreign bankers, are people that I've known throughout my banking career. They're no strangers to me, and so they come and tell me and talk to me in a manner that they feel they can speak very freely because they've known me for a number of years. And from that point of view, perhaps the family connection is a useful one.
But what about within the city itself? What about your contacts with other banks? Does the fact that you're a Baring and known to be a Baring, does this have any effect?
I don't think it has any marked effect, except that having spent my career in banking and prior to the Bank of England in Barings, these bankers do know that I can see their problems from their point of view, and so that I can be sympathetic and understanding.
To what extent do you act as intermediary between the banks and the government? And to what extent do you further their interests?
Well, insofar as it's necessary to speak for them collectively, there is a committee of the clearing banks, the Committee of London Clearing Bankers, and for the merchant banks, the Accepting Houses Association, and their chairmen keep me well informed of any general views they may have, and these views, naturally, I convey to the government. In reverse, if the government has any particular views as to the way things are going, which they think the banks should be aware of, they would use me as an intermediary to convey these views.
The Bank of England was founded in 1694 as a means of raising £1 million for King William III, who wanted it to pay the army. 100 years later, when it was well established, the government was hounding it in order to get gold to pay for the Napoleonic Wars. A cartoonist showed Pitt trying to rob